On the night of May 5, 1945, a thin man in a torn uniform is standing alone at the edge of a 400-foot cliff on the island of Okinawa. Below him, somewhere in the dark, is a rope sling he tied himself out of memory, the way his father had taught him to tie knots when he was a boy in Virginia. Above him, on the flat top of the escarpment, are wounded men. Some are conscious, some are not. Most of them, an hour ago, were trying to hold a line that no longer exists. He kneels next to one of them. He whispers something. The man cannot hear him. He drags the body the last few feet to the edge of the cliff, fits the rope under the arms, ties the bowline with frozen fingers, and lowers him over the side into the smoke. Then he walks back into the dark to find the next one. He has been doing this for hours. He will do it for hours more. Somewhere in his head, on a loop, he is repeating for words. Lord, please help me get one more. His name is Desmond. He is 26 years old. He has never fired a weapon in his life, and he never will. To understand how he got to that cliff, you have to go back to a small wooden house in Lynchburg, Virginia, in the late 1920s. The Doss family was poor, and the Doss family was religious. His mother was a Seventh-day Adventist, and she ran the household by a quiet kind of scripture. The Sabbath was Saturday. The body was a temple, and the sixth commandment was not a suggestion. His father was something else. William Doss had come home from the First World War a different man than the one who left. He drank. He shouted. He kept a service pistol in the house, and on one night when Desmond was small, that pistol was drawn in an argument between his parents. Desmond, a boy of maybe 10, ran into the kitchen and put himself between them. He took the pistol from his father. He carried it outside. He stood in the yard in the dark, holding the weight of it in his hand, and he made a decision that he would keep for the next 75 years. He would never touch a gun again. In April of 1942, the United States drafted him anyway. He was working in a Newport News shipyard. He could have stayed. Shipbuilders were essential workers, and the deferment was already in his file. But Desmond Doss had a peculiar idea about the war, and the idea was this, that if other men were going to die for the country, he should go too. He just would not kill for it. He reported to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. He told the recruiting officer he wanted to be a combat medic. He told them he would not carry a rifle. He told them, in the careful and slightly stubborn way he spoke, that he was not a conscientious objector. He was, he said, a conscientious cooperator. The Army did not have a category for that. The sergeants tried to break him. They gave him kitchen duty on Saturdays, knowing his Sabbath. They held his pass on weekends so he could not see his new wife, Dorothy, whom he had married the week before reporting. They put him in front of officers who told him, in flat voices, that they would have him court-martialed and sent to Leavenworth. The other recruits joined in. They threw boots at him while he knelt by his bunk to pray. They called him a coward. They called him things worse than coward. One night, an officer tried to have him discharged on a Section 8, mentally unfit for service. The hearing was scheduled. Desmond walked into the room with his Bible and answered the questions one by one. He did not raise his voice. He did not bend. The officer who had filed the paper sat through the testimony, and at the end of it, the discharge was denied. He stayed. In 1944, the 77th Infantry Division shipped to the Pacific. Doss went with them. By then, the men in his unit had begun to change their minds about him. Not all at once. Not loudly. They had simply watched him, for 2 years, do the work that a man with a rifle did not have to do. On Guam, he ran into mortar fire to drag wounded men back behind cover. On Leyte, he refused to take shelter when his platoon went down. He bandaged wounds in the rain. He gave away his rations. He kept extra plasma in his pack at the cost of weight that a sane man would have dropped. When the unit landed on Okinawa in April of 1945, the men who had once called him a coward were calling him something different. They were calling him Doc. The Leyte escarpment rises 400 feet out of the southern half of Okinawa. The Americans called it Hacksaw Ridge. The Japanese had spent months turning it into a fortress. Caves, tunnels, machine gun nests sighted on every approach. The 77th was ordered to take it. They climbed cargo nets up the cliff. They reached the top. They fought across the flat ground above for days. On the morning of May 5th, the Japanese launched a counterattack. It came fast and from positions the Americans had not mapped. The line buckled. The order came down to fall back over the edge of the cliff and regroup on the rocks below. Most of the company made it down. The wounded did not. Doss did not go down. He stayed on the ridge alone, in the smoke, with men he was not willing to leave behind. He had, at some point that day, remembered something from his Virginia boyhood. There was a kind of double-loop bowline a man could tie that would cradle a wounded body without crushing the chest. He had used it once to lower a friend down a tree. He tied that knot now, in the dirt, on top of a 400-foot cliff, while machine gun fire moved over the ground above his head. He crawled to the first wounded man. He looped the rope under his arms. He dragged him to the edge. He lowered him hand over hand, one slow, careful drop, until the rope went slack and someone below shouted up that they had him. Then he crawled back into the smoke for the next one. He did this, by his own count, for 12 hours. By the count of the men below, who watched body after body come down the cliff, it was about 75. He did not stop to count. The prayer in his head was the same prayer he had said since he was a boy in Lynchburg. He shortened it as he went. By the end of the day, he was saying only the last line. Lord, please help me get one more. When the cliff above him was empty, he lowered himself down. He was wounded later that month in 2 separate incidents, and the wounds tell you almost everything you need to know about him. The first was a grenade. He kicked it away from a group of men he was treating and caught the shrapnel in his legs. He did not call for a stretcher. He treated himself, lay in the dirt for hours, and waited for a quiet moment to be carried out. When the stretcher finally came, he saw another man on the ground, more badly wounded than he was. He rolled off the stretcher. He told the bearers to take the other man first. While he waited, a sniper round hit his arm. He set the fracture himself with a rifle stock, a rifle he was carrying for one purpose, and that purpose was not to fire it. He was finally carried off the ridge with his Bible in his hand. The Bible, the medics noticed, was a small one. It was the one Dorothy had given him before he reported to Fort Jackson. On October 12 of 1945, on the south lawn of the White House, President Harry Truman placed the Medal of Honor around the neck of Desmond Doss. Truman shook his hand for longer than the protocol required. "I'm proud of you," the president said. "I consider this a greater honor than being president." Doss was the first conscientious objector in American history to receive that medal. He did not give interviews. He did not write a memoir. He went home to Virginia, and then later to a small farm in Rising Fawn, Georgia, with Dorothy. He raised a son. He kept bees. He did handyman work for neighbors who often did not know what he had done. The war had not let him leave clean. He had contracted tuberculosis on Okinawa. The treatment that followed, over years, cost him a lung and most of his hearing. He lived for 60 more years on what was left of his body and on whatever it was that had kept him on that ridge. He died in March of 2006. He was 87 years old. In 2016, a film called Hacksaw Ridge introduced his story to a generation that had never heard of him. Most of what the film shows happened. Some of it did not. The cliff was real. The 75 men were real. The prayer was real. What the film could not quite show, and what the books and the documentary interviews try to, is the contradiction at the center of him. He was a man who refused to kill, and he ran toward men who were trying to kill him, to save other men who were trying to kill them. He did not see the contradiction. He saw a job. His war was not the war of his platoon. It was not the war of the country that sent him. It was a smaller and stranger war. A war fought with bandages and rope and a small Bible and 4 words repeated until they wore a groove in his head. Lord, please help me get one more. He got 75. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe. There are many more forgotten heroes of the Second World War, and we will tell their stories one at a time with the care they deserve.